Well, good morning. I think Daniel's got things set there, so if we're recording, Mom and Dad, if you're watching, I'm sorry about the game. Should have given a condolence call last night. And we'll be looking now at a section having to do with different healings and controversies that came up because of that. Getting up closer towards the midpoint of Jesus' ministry, and there's really a corner turned in this part where the scribes and Pharisees originally were just kind of checking him out, just kind of poking a little bit to see what he would do, see if he would back down, and we really definitely turn a corner in this one. And so starting with the parallels in Matthew 12 and Mark 3 and Luke 6, he went on and from there and entered their synagogue. Luke tells us on another Sabbath, so it's not on the same Sabbath as the preceding episode of the plucking heads of grain and those events. This is on another Sabbath. He enters a synagogue and is teaching. There's a man with a withered hand. Mark and Luke tell us the scribes and Pharisees watched him to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath so that they might find a reason to accuse him. Matthew tells us they actually posed the question to him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? Something kind of interesting about what the Pharisees do here is they've moved from, in their previous confrontations over these things, they had gone to him and said, your disciples are doing something that's not lawful on the Sabbath. This isn't right. You're doing something that's not lawful on the Sabbath. That didn't go well for them. That discussion didn't go well for them. So now they're more just sort of posing a question to try to put him in a position where he has difficulty defending. And he says to them, Matthew gives us this preceding statement, which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? And then he has the man come to the center. He calls the man to their midst and asks the question back, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil? And they don't have an answer for that. Then he heals the man, restores his hand. They don't really have an answer, but we have this postscript from Mark and Luke that they were filled with fury. They go out and hold counsel with the Herodians against him that they could destroy him. This is not an actual photograph of the event, but it's a rather nice Byzantine-style mosaic. We don't really know what the withered hand was. The term for a withered hand here is xeros in Greek, kind of like the term xeriscaping that people do with low water usage landscaping, which is also what I call just letting your yard go and not doing anything with it, which is my preference, actually. But it means to be dried up, to be shriveled. This could be something that had happened to the man by an injury, perhaps. Good morning. This could be something that happened by an injury. It could have been a birth defect of some sort. It could be any number of things might have happened. Might have been an injury, might have been a blood clot that had shut off blood flow and caused his hand to atrophy. We just don't really know. That's a pretty significant problem, right? Because most of the kinds of job, what kind of job back then could you do if you didn't have the use of one of your hands? If you were up, picking beans, you had to be twice as fast to keep up with the other guy. Now, I've seen people, and to their great credit, in fact, have a lovely niece on my wife's side who is a registered nurse, who has one of her hands was malformed at birth, and she has adapted around that and done an incredible job. So people obviously managed to work around these things, but back then there were so few jobs that you could do that didn't involve manual labor. This man was in a difficulty. They ask a leading question: is it right to heal on the Sabbath? And really what they're kind of posing to Jesus: are you going to break the Sabbath by healing, as they saw it, by doing some work on the Sabbath, or are you going to ignore this man's suffering, which then makes him look bad? The Pharisees would try multiple times, right, to put Jesus in some no-win situation, which never worked out for them. There were different opinions about this kind of thing among the rabbis. Just a few things that I found looking at the Mishnah, the collection of the rabbis' writings from the early centuries. A midwife, for example, according to the Shabbat section of the Mishnah, a midwife could break the Sabbath day's journey rule if she had to go help deliver a baby, or if she had to go deliver a baby and then go back and get something and then go back, that it was okay for a midwife to break the Sabbath in order to save a life. If a male child was born on a day that male child was supposed to be circumcised on the 8th day, if the 8th day fell on the Sabbath, then you should go ahead and circumcise him, even if that meant that the rabbi who's doing the circumcision or whoever had to travel more than a Sabbath day's journey, even if that meant that you had to make the preparations for the circumcision ceremony on the Sabbath, that, well, obviously the circumcision was one of the big commandments that you had to keep, and so it was okay to break those things. They had a lot of different opinions. If your sheep fell in the pit, there actually were some rulings from the rabbis about that. We don't know if they went back to the time of Jesus or not. It's kind of hard to tell, because there's really just not any dating on some of those. It might have been later. But there were some that had the opinion that if your animal fell in a pit, that you could lift the animal up, because that would be working, pulling the animal up out of the pit. But if you dropped cushions into the pit so that the animal, you could make like a ramp, as long as you were dropping them and not picking things up, and the animal could make a ramp and you could get the animal to walk out of the pit, then that was okay. We figured that probably a lot of the time, if this was your only cow, that was your milk cow, you probably went ahead and saved its life on the Sabbath because you just depended on that animal so much. So there was some history to this kind of question. And Jesus gives them this is one of the few times that we see it specified that Jesus got angry. He was really angry with the way that they did this. He points out in Matthew's record of Jesus' statement that any of them would save their animal on the Sabbath because they wouldn't want to lose that animal. But they're playing this game here over this man's health and livelihood, in a sense saying that they cared more about an animal than they did a man, because this man wasn't costing them anything. If they lost that animal, they lost, that was capital. They couldn't afford to lose that animal. And Jesus poses the question correctly: is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil? You're confronted with choices every day, whether it's the Sabbath or not. Are you going to do good or are you going to do evil? And they don't really have an answer, do they? They're notably quiet after this episode. So Jesus brings the man to the center. That may just be incidental, but it's kind of interesting too, that the Pharisees were using this man, right? They were using this man's unfortunate situation. And who knows, this man might have had a family, he might have had dependents, and then he'd become injured like this and couldn't work, and it's a terrible situation. We've all known people that fell into a circumstance like that was just a terrible difficulty for them. The Pharisees were using this man to try to score points against Jesus. Jesus brings the man into the midst, in front of them, reminding this is a human being we're talking about. And they were using him, and Jesus is angry. Does Jesus sin in his anger? Of course not. There a time to be angry? Well, certain things make us angry, and maybe some of them shouldn't. There's plenty of things plenty of things that make me angry sometimes that I shouldn't get angry about. I shouldn't get angry at the person who does something foolish on the road that inconveniences me. I should adopt the true Southern attitude of, well, bless their heart. Bless their heart. Maybe they have to get to the bathroom real fast or something, who knows? Maybe that's a doctor rushing to the hospital to save someone's life. I doubt it, but I shouldn't really get angry about a thing like that. Jesus got angry about, what other things did Jesus get angry about? The money changers in the temple. And you know, when people were abusing him, spitting on him, beating him in the face, whipping him, does he show anger at the people that are doing this to him? That's incredible how he didn't show that anger. But if you disrespected his father's house, that just really set him into a righteous fury.
Well, as you said, they were using this man. So
Yeah.
he's angry on behalf of their treatment of a person who is just as valuable to God
Yeah.
as those Pharisees.
Right. And go ahead.
What makes you think that they're angry, that Jesus is angry? What in the context?
In the text, well, it says so. Back in Mark and 5, that he looks around in anger. It was just kind of, don't mean to make too much of it, just kind of odd. It's usually not specified. There's very seldom that we see the text actually says that Jesus got angry. But that, yeah, the treatment, as Melanie said, the mistreatment of other people in order to get at him made him angry. And he restores the man's hand. Just instantly, stretch out your hand. Wonder what went through the man's mind. So here, stretch out your hand. He might have thought, the first thing he might have thought was, oh, I wish I could. But he tries, and he does. And there, he's just restored. Something to think about. You know, we are in the same, when that man was healed, he was just brought up to the same place that you and I, all of us here, woke up this morning. 2 hands, able to work. Not as reliable as I wish they were. I have fat, stubby fingers that mistype things all the time, but this man was glad just to be able to have 2 hands to work with. And reminds us how valuable just the blessings of just a reasonable amount of health is. If you can get up out of bed in the morning, if you can stand up, now everything may creak and pop a little bit, start walking and you hear everything sort of crackle and settle into place, but that's not happened to you yet, Rachel. But if you can get up and stand upright and walk around, you're ahead of a lot of people in the world that wish they could do that. This man with the withered hand was able to get out and take care of himself again. And the Pharisees' response, we have an interesting level of hypocrisy. They're asking Jesus if it was lawful to heal on the Sabbath, kind of suggesting an accusation that he is misbehaving by healing. What are they doing on the Sabbath after this is over? They're plotting an assassination. They're plotting murder on the Sabbath. Is it lawful to plot murder on the Sabbath? Doesn't seem to matter to them. I don't know who first said that statement of politics makes strange bedfellows, that you just never know who's going to end up. Politics will cause some strange alliances, won't it? The Pharisees and the Herodians. It'd be hard to find two groups that hated each other as much as those two probably did. The Pharisees, what are they known for? They're the real conservative Jewish people really trying to follow the Old Testament law as they saw it. They were the ones who were really following the law, were really the defenders of it. And you know, probably if I lived back then, I probably would identify with the Pharisees as the ones who are trying to follow who at least uphold the authority of God's law. Now, Jesus showed they did a very poor job of living that commitment, but that's what they stood for. The Herodians, the supporters of Herod. The Herod family were just sort of barely Jewish. It's kind of debatable even how Jewish they were. The Herods were actually from Idumea. They were related to the Jews through being the descendants of, Cain, not Cain, descendants of Esau. So part of the Herod's background came through the lineage of Esau in Edom, which meant they were sort of culturally related to the Jews, and then the Herod family had intermarried with the Jews. Basically what happened is during all the drama going on with Mark Antony and Cleopatra and Pompey, all of that stuff going on in the days before Julius Caesar takes over as emperor of Rome. Cleopatra, of course, is in Egypt. Well, Judea is right there in that same old crossroads that it's always been, and it was, there was a question there of, well, which way is Judea going to go? Who's going to be in charge of Judea? And the Herods, to make a long story probably too short and leaving out too much, the Herods cut a deal, sort of, to support one side if they could be the kings of Judea and that area. And so after the war was over and Julius Caesar came out on top, then he honored that deal by allowing the Herods to become the kings over Judea. They were not, of course, the rightful heirs of the throne of David by a long shot. And so the people who were loyal to God's word and looking for the Messiah, the true son of David, to come back and revive their kingdom, they saw him as this interloper, So the Herods were not real popular with most of the Jews anyway. They were just they viewed them as kind of carpetbagger politicians, in a sense, to use one of our own cultural terms. They weren't even from here, And the Pharisees and the Herodians getting together, that's a strange, strange day. But their hatred of Jesus came along the same way. That's also part of the reason that the King Herod King Herod of the days when Jesus was born in Bethlehem, why he was so afraid, because he was always looking over his shoulder that some Jewish rebel was going to come along and claim to be the rightful king. Their grasp on power was kind of tenuous at best. But Herod, the the Herod who was in, I don't have trouble remembering which one's which of the different Herods. The Herod who was king during this time had locked up John the Baptist because he didn't like John the Baptist meddling in his affairs, literally. And having the Herod having locked up John the Baptist, maybe the Pharisees think that, well, you know, they were able to get John the Baptist out of the way. Maybe we could get them to do the same thing with Jesus. Just a strange thing. They had become so twisted in their opposition to Jesus that they were willing to make common cause with people who were their enemies by all rights. Any comments about that section, the man with the withered hand?
You know, when we went over Mark, two types of anger, in my understanding, one is a feeling of displeasure, but under control, and then the other is a rage out of control. And I've written down Ephesians 6:4, where that is where fathers do not provoke your children to wrath.
Yeah. That rage, yeah.
I think the anger there is they should have known that. You're the ones that are studying. You know, like when we get mad at our kids, you should have known that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've been teaching you, you've been, and so I think it grieved him.
Yeah.
That it had gotten to that point that their heart had been so tainted, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were going to do and say anything to maintain it.
Mm-hmm. And that, I think you're exactly right, it had become about power to a lot of them. And that's a corrupting thing going as far back as you want to go. Yes, Kevin.
Yeah, just picking up on what Kevin said over there, mindful of the words of God speaking to Jonah, in the situation there. He asked Jonah, do you have a good reason to be angry? Do you have a good reason to be angry? In other words, implying that there are many times when people are angry and they don't need to be, but there are other times that there are. And then just looking right here in Mark, says, and when he had looked around at them with anger, being grieved by the hardness of hearts. His anger was spurred by the hardness of the hearts of the individuals there. And that's a good reason to be angry, according to Jesus. And then tying that to Ephesians 4, where it says, be angry, but don't sin in your anger, right? And don't let the sun go down on your wrath. So those are kind of probably the two good questions for us to ask anytime we find ourselves angry is, do you have good reason for it? If not, get over it. And secondly, if you do, don't sin, because it is a lot easier to get caught up in things,
Yeah.
do things that we regret later in our anger. So be angry, but sin not. Don't let the sin go down.
Right. Very good points. We're looking at the next section. Mark tells us that he has a large crowd following him at this point and comes down by the sea. Verse 9, the disciples have a boat ready for him because of the crowd. He can make a little natural amphitheater along the shore, as people are crowded around the shore. He gets back on a boat a little ways off so that he can project to them. Luke tells us this is down in a level place. And Mark, verse 10, and Luke in verse 18, first part, they came to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Matthew just says that many followed him and he healed them all. And Mark and Luke tell us there were some who were troubled with unclean spirits, and they were cured. Mark tells us here that the unclean spirits would cry out, "You are the Son of God," but he ordered them not to make him known. Don't really want that kind of witness. You don't really want that kind of witness to yourself. That's what they said was true, and they certainly knew who he was. Those demons would certainly recognize the power that cast them out, but he didn't want that. Matthew gives us a much more full account, and also, as Matthew often does, Matthew will always give you the Old Testament prophecy. Additionally, just like Luke, I forgot to mention about the withered hand. Luke is the one who says it was his right hand. Luke's a doctor. You want to note which hand it was, so if you examine a person again, you make sure you check the right hand. In case they got better, you want to check. Go ahead.
So why do you think he tells you? So what you're saying is he doesn't want the demons to be his witness, I guess?
I'm suggesting that. I don't, that's just a supposition that he didn't want that kind of witness to who he was.
You remember when he heals the guy who couldn't walk?
Right.
And
Yes.
And they said, he says that you may know that the Son of Man has the power to forgive sins.
Mm-hmm.
And then he tells the man to pick up your bed and walk.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't you, he would have known, he just called himself the Son of Man. Oh, maybe they didn't know what the Son of Man was.
I don't know, Kevin. I don't know.
It's interesting, though, that he does that in several different occasions, and you always kind of wonder why.
That he doesn't want people.
Yeah, to spread the news.
You know, it's supposition, and to some extent it's supposition, why he wouldn't. Some of the time I think context can tell us that what ended up happening is that the crowds became so big around him that he wasn't able to get anything done. Yeah. And that this is supposition, that he wanted people to take time to really hear what he was saying, to really hear the message of the kingdom and the new life that he was teaching, rather than immediately jumping to the Son of God's here, it's our King's come back and we're going to do now whatever, running off a little too soon. He wanted people to have more time to think and to be convinced. And also there were times when it just drew too much attention that could cause the authorities to crack down. Perhaps. And it's just supposition. With the demons, I think it's a reasonable supposition that he just doesn't really want to accept he doesn't want testimony from them. It's a witness to his being the Son of God anyway, but that's not necessarily something he wants. And he wants people to listen to what he's saying rather than to be caught up in the signs and the miracles. The miracles are there to point to the message, and it was easy, like it is for people today, to get caught up in the show of things and not listen to the words.
No, that's what the scripture tells us, is that it was to show that he had authority from God, to prove that he was. He had it, if you look at it, it was to show that he had power over the elements, power over the physical, power over the spiritual.
Right.
There was no aspect that he was not in 100% control of. And
That's true.
I'm sure they realized that as they watched it and saw it unfold.
Right. Everything that he did, every miracle he did had a point to it in one way or another. When feeding the 5,000, which we haven't come to yet.
That's exactly what was in my mind.
Yeah, feeding the 5,000 Let's see, when is another time that a great prophet, leader from God, miraculously provided bread to people in the wilderness? You know, it's the manna. It's Moses, and the manna is what might have immediately come to mind for those people. Matthew gives this prophecy from Isaiah. Behold my servant whom I have chosen, my beloved with whom my soul is well pleased. I will put my spirit upon him, and he will proclaim justice to the Gentiles. He will not quarrel or cry aloud, nor will anyone hear his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not quench, until he brings justice to victory, and in his name the Gentiles will hope. It's interesting, this quote from Isaiah mentions the Gentiles twice. You know, not just the Jews, but the Gentiles as well, everybody. I'm thankful for that. This is kind of a contrast here to the confrontations he's been having. There are times when Jesus withdrew from a conflict. There are times when he just stepped away. Maybe that is a message to us. He wanted to teach. He wanted to give his message to people. He wanted to heal. He argued with the Pharisees. He answered the Pharisees, but he didn't come down to the earth to argue with the Pharisees, right? That's not what he came for. He did when he had to. But he came to teach and to heal. And in that Isaiah 42 quote, I think we see that. He didn't just put on a big show and try to draw as big a crowd as he could all the time. And he handled the confrontations on his own terms. The Isaiah quote says he didn't have a raised voice. There may be a time, at the tomb of Lazarus, where he cries out with a loud voice. I should have looked that up if I wanted to know that. It just occurred to me. Are there times that the Bible says that Jesus raised his voice? Tomb of Lazarus. Maybe some other times. But generally, no. He didn't have to raise his voice. There's an old joke that I heard from a preacher about debating, that supposedly he saw someone's debate notes and they had written under one point, they had written, weak point here, talk louder. There's a certain amount of truth to that. You know, some people, the weaker their argument gets, the louder they get. If I just get louder, then this will sound better. And he wasn't going to let his enemies determine what he did. He still had a job to do. You know, that he could have spent the whole time he was on this earth, arguing with the Pharisees, and they still wouldn't have been convinced, right? They would always have, but what about? He didn't let them determine his schedule. He didn't let them determine what he was going to talk about. He dealt with their controversies, but he kept his focus on his mission. Application for us, I think Eddie's touched on this in some sermons recently, that we have to deal with church controversies. There's times things have to be addressed, no question of that. But that's not what we're here for. You know, those are things that are sadly incidental to standing for the truth. Sadly, we do sometimes have to deal with brotherhood controversies. But we're here to teach the gospel. We're here for the gospel. And we address those things as we need to, but that doesn't become, if that becomes the main thing we want to talk about, well, we're leaving out a lot of other things that people need to be heard, need the whole counsel of God. And Jesus didn't let that define what he did. He was building up and not tearing down. These are interesting phrases. He wouldn't break a bruised reed. He wouldn't put out a smoldering flax. They used flax for wicks and lamps, and that is probably, you read that first and think smoldering flax. Well, if the field's on fire, you probably ought to stomp it out. But if you're talking about a wick of flax that's smoldering, when you have a lamp that's about to go out, it's more the picture of trying to bring that flax back into flame. He's trying to bring that flame back into fuller life. The bruised reed, he's not trying to just break it and destroy it. He's trying to bind up and heal. And so it gives us an image of the gentleness and the healing that came along with the stern teaching that we see as well. Now, one of the most interesting ones of this period of his ministry, a demon-possessed man who's blind and mute. There's possibility that he's, when ancient texts speak of a person being mute, there's possibility that they are assuming that this is a deaf, mute person. There are people who are mute who are not deaf, of course, right? But that is generally, might be assumed here. Anyway, this man, is in a terrible situation. Brought to him to be healed, and the man spoke and saw. Look at what Matthew points out, what the people say. Can this be the son of David? Matthew's always got that angle for the Jewish reader, Pay attention, Jewish reader. You know your background, you know your history. This is what people were looking at. Could this be the son of David? And when the Pharisees heard it, they said, it is only by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, that this man casts out demons. Interesting that they go to that, they kind of go to the nuclear option here. And it's after people are saying, could this be the son of David? It's one thing to say that this man is a prophet from God, like John the Baptist. But when they start to say son of David, well, that's getting serious now. And the Pharisees are determined to stop him. So they say, by Beelzebul, the prince of demons, this man casts out demons. And knowing their thoughts, he gives them these answers. First off, a kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. And so, as in Mark 26, if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but is coming to an end. And get the picture of someone fighting themselves. It's just kind of hard to imagine, somebody just punch himself in the face hard as he can. Try to do a flying kick against yourself. It doesn't make any sense. You don't fight against yourself. So first argument, why would Satan cast out Satan? Why would Satan fight against himself? And Matthew chapter 12, verse 27, if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out? Therefore they will be your judges. That's an interesting argument. It's a very interesting argument. Have some fun looking at that. And then in Luke about verse 21, Matthew about 29, if someone enters a strong man's house, if someone enters a strong man's house, binds up the strong man and takes his stuff. It takes someone stronger than the strong man to come into his house and bind him up and take his stuff. And in this case, the strong man in his house is the devil with people under his control by possession. And Jesus is saying someone stronger, a stronger man came. What you're actually seeing here is someone stronger than Satan came and took away his possessions, literally possessed people.
Well, you brought up something that I had never.
Uh-oh.
And if I cast out demons by Beelzebul, by whom do your sons cast them out?
Yeah,
I didn't know
that's
the
weird.
Pharisees were capable of casting out.
Well, I'm not sure they were either.
What?
I'm not sure they were either. And I'm not sure Jesus is saying that they were legit either, but they claimed that they did. There's a time in book of...
That they were trying to they would say, we're doing the exact same thing Jesus is doing.
Well, there was this history of... There was this history in Jewish thinking around leading up to that time. There's this history of their beliefs about demons, and it wasn't anything that came from the Bible. It was kind of more myth and so forth. And they had exorcists. There's in the book of Acts, there's a group of Jewish exorcists, the sons of Sceva, that try to cast out demons by the name of Jesus, because they saw Paul cast out demons. And the demon says to them, I know who Jesus is, and I know who Paul is, and who in the world are you? And the guy jumps up and whips all of them and sends them out running. So there were Jewish exorcists around.
So you're saying that it was probably a false.
Well,
I don't know, I can't think of a single time in the Bible, one place, where the Pharisees were capable of casting out demons.
yeah, that's all. This is all that's said about it in Scripture. Now,
So he's pointing out a lot.
in history outside the Bible, like Josephus talks about some people who claimed to cast out demons, and I got a quote from some of them. You can judge for yourself what's going on there. It sounds like a tomfoolery to me. Yeah, he could be kind of needling them about that. So you've got some so-called exorcists. So whose power are they doing it by?
I never thought of
And it's a strange thing.
There's also sort of a similar passage in Matthew 7:21 and following. Not everyone that says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he that does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name? Have we not cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. So,
Good point. Hadn't thought about that.
claiming to do things under the authority of Jesus, and Jesus is saying, no.
Well, just as there are people that claim to do things under Jesus, heal the sick.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Today,
Charlie.
and Jesus is going to say, depart from me.
Well, just a little bit about demons, and I don't want to get into any more about that than I've already had to do in my life. Just some things, looking at what happened with possession. You have these effects on the body. There's, this case, a man who's blind, and sometimes there's deafness and muteness. Seizures sometimes seem to be connected with it. The effect on the mind, usually the person who is demon-possessed, it's like they are not in control at all. If they speak, it's the demon speaking. At least under the times, it seems like they're not always possessed all of the time, maybe, that there's times when the demon does different things to them, like the child who, sometimes the demon will cast them into the fire. Does that mean they were possessed all the time, or just sometimes it took hold of them? We don't really know. Acts chapter 16, there's the slave girl in Ephesus who has a spirit of divination that Paul casts out. And is that her speaking of her own volition? Don't really know. It seems that might be the only case, but usually the person is not able to act on their own. And they're very often violent, usually towards themselves. Just the destruction of their own body, sometimes violent towards other people. Well, get on to that next time. Thank you very much.